The secure phone rang 3 times before General Harrison Blackwood answered, his weathered face already grim with the weight of failure. 27 hours had passed since Sophia Chun, the president's 18-year-old daughter, vanished from her diplomatic escort in the mountains of Carviston. The initial search had turned up only blood and the twisted wreckage of armored vehicles scattered across the narrow mountain pass. Admiral Kane stepped into the war room, shaking his head before Blackwood could ask. "We lost another team," Kane said, his voice hollow. "Delta Force tried the eastern approach. 3 casualties, no visual on the target. The fortress is impenetrable." Blackwood studied the satellite imagery spread across the table. The ancient stone compound sat like a crown atop sheer cliffs, accessible only by a single winding road that enemy forces had turned into a killing field. Every elite unit in their arsenal had attempted infiltration. Every mission had ended in retreat or worse. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've heard stories of heroes who were thought lost forever in your area. In the corner of the room, a communications officer named Torres looked up from her console with confusion etched across her face. "Sir," she called to Blackwood, "I'm receiving an encrypted transmission on a frequency that's been dead for 15 years. The transmission crackled with static, but the voice that emerged was steady and unmistakably female. "General Blackwood, this is Operative Vera Nightingale. I understand you have a problem in Carviston." Every person in the war room froze. Admiral Kane's coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the concrete floor. The name Vera Nightingale belonged to a ghost, a legend whispered about in classified briefings, but never spoken aloud in mixed company. Torres stared at her equipment in disbelief. "Sir, according to our records, Vera Nightingale was killed in action during Operation Silent Thunder 15 years ago. Her file is marked deceased, classified beyond top-secret clearance." Blackwood's hands trembled as he reached for the communication device. The last time he had heard that voice, it was reporting mission success from behind enemy lines in Afghanistan before her entire unit went dark. The official report stated that Operative Nightingale and her team had been eliminated in a coordinated enemy assault. No bodies were ever recovered. "I know what your files say, General," the voice continued through the speakers, as if reading his thoughts. "But your daughter's situation requires someone who doesn't officially exist. Someone who can move through channels that your living operatives cannot access." Kane stepped closer to the console, his face pale with recognition. "If you're really Vera Nightingale, then you know the classified details of your final mission report." The voice on the other end was quiet for a long moment. Then it spoke with chilling precision about events that only 3 people in the world should have known. The details she recited were impossible for anyone outside the operation to know. Blackwood sank into a chair as Vera described the exact positioning of enemy forces, the weather conditions on that final night, and most damning of all, the emergency extraction code that had never been documented in any official report. Admiral Kane grabbed the secure phone and barked orders to his intelligence staff. Within minutes, encrypted files were being pulled from the deepest military archives. The photographs that appeared on screen showed a woman in her early 30s with sharp green eyes and auburn hair pulled back in regulation style. Below the image, red letters spelled out her status clearly. "Killed in action, Operation Silent Thunder, classified indefinitely." Meanwhile, Captain Rodriguez from the latest failed rescue attempt limped into the war room, his left arm in a sling and his face bearing fresh cuts from enemy fire. "General," he reported grimly, "the Carviston compound is impossible. They have overlapping fields of fire, thermal imaging, and enough firepower to stop an entire battalion. We counted at least 40 hostiles, all heavily armed and positioned in defensive positions that would make the devil himself proud." The voice from the speakers interrupted Rodriguez's debriefing. "Captain, you approached from a northeast ravine and encountered resistance at approximately 1,400 meters from a main gate. You lost Sergeant Morrison when he attempted to breach the outer perimeter using standard explosive charges." Rodriguez staggered backward, his face draining of color. How could you possibly know that? Morrison's injury isn't even in our preliminary reports yet. We just extracted him 20 minutes ago. The silence in the war room stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Torres frantically traced the transmission signal, her fingers flying across multiple keyboards as she attempted to pinpoint the source. The readouts showed the signal bouncing through 17 different satellite relays across 4 continents, making it virtually impossible to track. General Blackwood leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Vera, if you're really alive, where have you been for 15 years? Why didn't you contact us? Why let us believe you were dead? Because being dead kept me alive, General, came the reply. The mission in Afghanistan went sideways when we discovered that our extraction coordinates had been compromised from the inside. Someone in our own command structure was feeding intelligence to the enemy. My team and I had 2 choices: die for real or disappear completely. Admiral Kane's face hardened with understanding. You suspected a mole in our operation. That's why you went dark. You've been operating off the books for 15 years. The woman's voice carried a weight of years spent in shadow. I've been watching, General, tracking threats, eliminating problems before they reached official channels, protecting assets that couldn't be protected through conventional means. The President's daughter isn't my first unofficial rescue mission. She's just the first one you'll know about. Captain Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. Ma'am, with all due respect, the fortress holding her is suicide for a single operative. We've thrown everything at it. Rangers, Delta Force, Navy SEALs. Nothing works. That's because you've been thinking like soldiers, Captain. I've been thinking like a ghost. The satellite imagery on the main screen flickered and suddenly transformed into a 3-dimensional tactical display that none of the military personnel had seen before. Torres gasped as new data streams flooded her console, showing thermal signatures, guard rotation patterns, and structural weaknesses that their intelligence had missed completely. How are you accessing our systems? Kane demanded, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm, even though the threat was incorporeal. I'm not accessing your systems, Admiral. I'm sharing mine. For 15 years, I've been building intelligence networks that your official channels could never penetrate. While you've been fighting wars with armies, I've been fighting them with information. The display zoomed in on the fortress, revealing a complex network of underground tunnels that connected to an abandoned mining operation 3 kilometers to the west. Vera's voice continued with clinical precision. The compound was built on top of an old copper mine. The hostiles know about the main entrance, but they've overlooked the ventilation shafts that connect to the original mining infrastructure. General Blackwood studied the new intelligence with growing amazement. These tunnels aren't on any of our geological surveys. How did you acquire this information? Because I've been there, General. Not the fortress itself, but I spent 6 months in those mountains tracking a different target 2 years ago. I mapped every cave, every tunnel, every possible approach that conventional forces would never consider. Captain Rodriguez limped closer to the display, his skepticism gradually giving way to professional interest. Ma'am, even if these tunnels exist, one person infiltrating that complex alone is still a suicide mission. Vera's response carried the confidence of someone who had already calculated every variable. Captain, suicide missions are what happen when you don't have enough information. I've had 15 years to gather information that your official intelligence agencies couldn't access if they had 50 years. The tactical display shifted again, now showing real-time movement patterns of the guards. Red dots moved across the screen in precise formations, their patrol routes mapped down to the second. Blue indicators showed blind spots in their coverage, windows of opportunity that lasted mere minutes. Torres stared at her equipment in amazement. Ma'am, this is real-time intelligence. Our satellites can't penetrate the cloud cover in that region right now. How are you seeing this? Because I'm not relying on your satellites, Vera replied. I have assets on the ground, people who've been in place for months. The beauty of being officially dead is that no one looked for your network. Admiral Kane stepped closer to the display, his professional skepticism warring with growing respect. What kind of assets are we talking about? Local informants? Better than informants, Admiral. I have someone inside the compound itself. A maintenance worker who's been feeding me intelligence for the past 6 months. He doesn't know about the president's daughter specifically, but he's provided detailed layouts of the interior structure, guard schedules, and most importantly, the location of the holding cells. General Blackwood felt a spark of hope for the first time since the crisis began. You're saying you have an inside man? Someone who can assist with the extraction? Not assist, General. Someone who can create the perfect distraction at exactly the right moment. All I need is 12 minutes of chaos, and Sophia Chun will be free. The war room erupted in a flurry of activity as senior officers began coordinating support elements for Vera's operation. Admiral Kane pulled up communication protocols while Captain Rodriguez, despite his injuries, started calculating extraction routes and backup contingencies. Wait, General Blackwood interrupted, holding up his hand to silence the room. Before we commit to this operation, I need to understand something. Vera, you've been operating in the shadows for 15 years. Why surface now? Why risk exposure for this mission? The transmission was quiet for several heartbeats. When Vera's voice returned, it carried a weight of personal conviction that hadn't been present before. Because Sophia Chun reminded me of someone I failed to save 15 years ago. A young woman who trusted me to bring her home safely, and I let politics and procedure get in the way of doing what was right. Torres looked up from her console with fresh intelligence. General, I've been cross-referencing the Operation Silent Thunder files. There was a civilian contractor's daughter taken hostage during that mission. Maria Santos, age 19. She was executed by enemy forces while our command debated diplomatic solutions. That's correct, Vera confirmed, her voice hardening with remembered pain. Maria Santos died because I followed orders instead of following my instincts. I won't make that mistake again. Some missions are bigger than politics, bigger than official protocols. Some missions are about keeping promises to the dead. General Blackwood understood completely. The weight of command meant living with decisions that haunted you forever. Very well, Operative Nightingale. What do you need from us? Nothing, General. Just stay out of my way and be ready to receive one rescued president's daughter in approximately 8 hours. The transmission ended with a sharp click, leaving the war room in stunned silence. General Blackwood stared at the now empty communication channel, feeling as though he had just witnessed something impossible. A ghost had spoken to them, made promises that defied military logic, and then vanished back into the ether. Admiral Kane began coordinating with nearby naval assets, preparing for emergency medical evacuation and diplomatic extraction protocols. Torres continued monitoring satellite feeds, though she knew Vera was already beyond their ability to track. Captain Rodriguez, despite his injuries, insisted on staying in the command center to oversee any support operations that might be needed. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in the mountains of Carviston, a figure dressed in dark tactical gear emerged from a carefully concealed cave entrance. Vera Nightingale moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of remaining invisible. Her equipment was minimal but specialized, custom weapons that fired subsonic rounds, climbing gear rated for impossible ascents, and communication devices that operated on frequencies known only to her network. She paused at the edge of a rocky outcropping, studying the fortress through high-powered optics. The compound looked exactly as her intelligence had indicated, but she spent precious minutes confirming guard positions and timing their movements. Patience had kept her alive for 15 years, and she wouldn't abandon it now when Sophia Chen's life hung in the balance. Her encrypted radio crackled once with a brief message from her inside asset. The distraction would begin in exactly 90 minutes. Vera checked her chronometer and began her descent toward the abandoned mine entrance, each step calculated to avoid detection. The mine entrance yawned before Vera like the mouth of some ancient beast, its wooden support beams weathered by decades of mountain storms. She activated her night vision equipment and descended into the tunnel system, her boots making no sound on the rocky floor. The air grew colder as she moved deeper underground, following memorized routes through passages that hadn't seen human traffic in over 30 years. Her radio remained silent, but she knew her inside asset was preparing for his role in the operation. Hassan Kalmari had been working maintenance in the fortress for 8 months, invisible to the guards who barely acknowledged his existence. Tonight, his carefully planned electrical malfunction would plunge the compound into darkness for exactly 12 minutes, while backup generators struggled to compensate for cascading system failures. Vera navigated by memory and instinct through the labyrinth of mining tunnels, her mental map guiding her toward the ventilation shaft that would emerge inside the fortress basement. Each turn brought her closer to Sophia Chun, but also deeper into territory where a single mistake would mean death for both of them. She paused at a junction where 3 tunnels converged, listening intently for any sound that might indicate discovery. The silence was complete except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the darkness. 15 years of survival had taught her to trust these moments of absolute quiet, to use them for final preparation before stepping into chaos. Her chronometer showed 47 minutes until the distraction began. Vera continued forward, each step bringing her closer to a reckoning 15 years in the making. Maria Santos would finally have justice, and Sophia Chun would go home. The ventilation shaft emerged behind a stack of maintenance equipment in the fortress basement, exactly as Hassan had described. Vera waited in the shadows, controlling her breathing while guards passed overhead. Their boots echoed through the stone corridors in predictable patterns that she had memorized from weeks of surveillance data. At precisely 0347 hours, the fortress plunged into complete darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on for 30 seconds before Hassan's sabotage caused those systems to fail as well. Shouts erupted from multiple directions as guards stumbled through corridors they thought they knew by heart. Vera moved like liquid shadow through the chaos, her night vision equipment giving her an overwhelming advantage over confused hostiles. She neutralized 3 guards with silent precision, her subsonic rounds ensuring that their colleagues remained unaware of the threat moving among them. Each elimination was calculated, necessary, and executed with the cold efficiency of someone who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of invisible warfare. The holding cells were located in the fortress's eastern tower, accessible through a narrow staircase that wound upward through ancient stone walls. Vera ascended silently, her equipment detecting 2 guards stationed outside the cell block. They were arguing in harsh whispers about the power failure, their attention focused entirely on their radios rather than their immediate surroundings. She reached the landing and paused, listening for any sound from within the cells. A faint voice drifted through the heavy wooden door, young and frightened but unmistakably alive. Sophia Chun was exactly where Hassan's intelligence had indicated, and Vera's 12-minute window was already half expired. The 2 guards never knew what happened. Vera's movements were surgical, precise, and utterly silent. Within seconds, both men lay unconscious on the stone floor, their weapons secured and their radio communications disabled. She located the cell keys and moved toward the heavy wooden door where Sophia's voice had originated. "Miss Chun," Vera whispered through the door, "my name is Vera Nightingale. I'm here to take you home. Your father sent me." The voice on the other side was shaky but coherent. "Are you really American military? They told me no one was coming. They said my father had abandoned diplomatic efforts." Vera worked quickly on the lock mechanism, her tools designed for exactly this type of medieval hardware. "Your father has moved heaven and earth to find you, Miss Chun. Half the military is coordinating your extraction right now, but we need to move immediately. Can you walk?" The door swung open to reveal a young woman with dark hair and determined eyes that reminded Vera instantly of Maria Santos. Sophia Chun was thinner than in her official photographs, but she stood without assistance and showed no signs of serious injury. "I can walk," Sophia said firmly. "I can run if necessary. How are we getting out of here?" Vera handed her a spare radio and a small flashlight. We're going underground through mining tunnels that your captors don't know exist. Stay close to me, do exactly what I say, and in 30 minutes you'll be in a secure extraction zone. Emergency power flickered back on throughout the fortress, casting erratic shadows on the walls. Vera's 12-minute window was closing rapidly, but the most dangerous part of their escape still lay ahead. The descent through the fortress was a controlled sprint through shadows and chaos. Vera led Sophia through corridors filled with confused guards, their route calculated to avoid main thoroughfares while staying ahead of organized search efforts. When they reached the basement ventilation shaft, alarms finally began wailing throughout the compound. The mining tunnels provided sanctuary from the madness above. Vera guided Sophia through the underground maze with absolute confidence, her memorized routes leading them steadily away from the fortress and toward the extraction zone. Behind them, searchlights swept the mountainside as enemy forces realized their prize had vanished. 3 hours later, General Blackwood received the transmission he had barely dared to hope for. Package secured and delivered to friendly forces, Vera's voice reported with professional satisfaction. Miss Chun is unharmed and ready for immediate transport to medical evaluation. The war room erupted in restrained celebration as Admiral Kane confirmed that Marine helicopters had successfully retrieved both Sophia Chun and her mysterious rescuer. For the first time in 36 hours, the crisis was over. But when the helicopters landed at the secure airbase, only Sophia Chun emerged from the aircraft. The Marines reported that their second passenger had vanished during the flight, leaving behind only a handwritten note thanking them for their service. If this story of sacrifice and heroism moved you, drop a comment about your favorite moment, or share if you know someone who made similar sacrifices for others. Vera Nightingale had returned to the shadows as quietly as she had emerged, her mission complete and her promise to Maria Santos finally fulfilled. Some legends, it seemed, preferred to remain legends.